The little girl didn't knock. She didn't wait to be invited. She simply appeared beside my desk in the Gallo estate library, her small hand resting on an oversized mythology book she could barely carry. She was 7, with soft curls and solemn eyes that didn't match her age, eyes that had already learned what fear looked like in the dark. "Can you tell me about her?" she asked, tapping a bronze-etched image of Athena with a fingertip too gentle for the life she lived. For a moment, I just stared at her. This wasn't part of the lesson plan. Nothing about this moment fell under the list of approved materials, timings, or behaviors I'd been strictly instructed to follow on my first day. "Sophia, where's your guard?" I whispered, glancing around the vast library. Shelves soared 3 stories high, full of books she wasn't allowed to touch without permission and shadowed constantly by men in dark suits with expressionless eyes. But there were no guards in sight. No footsteps. No one hovering protectively a few inches behind her like usual. "I told them I needed a bathroom break," she said without guilt, settling herself into the leather chair across from me. I walked the other way instead. My heart lurched. "You can't do that." "Your father, Papa, won't notice," she said, opening the book to a page she'd dog-eared herself. "They always watch me. All the time. And I don't want to be watched today." She looked up at me then, not scared, but pleading. "I just want to learn something real." Every instinct in me screamed to call her nanny, the housekeeper, security, anyone who technically outranked me in the chain of command around her. But then she whispered, "Please." "I won't ask again." I should have reported it. I should have walked her back to her guard. I should have done exactly what every tutor before me had done, stick to the script. Instead, I opened the book. For 20 quiet minutes, she listened like the world outside those library walls didn't exist. No guards. No schedules. No danger. Just a child and a story she wasn't supposed to ask for. Then the air changed. 2 men in dark suits entered the library, moving with sharp, sweeping glances. Their hands hovered near their holsters. They weren't looking for a book. They were looking for her. Sophia noticed. She went still. Her fingers tightened around the page. Her shoulders tensed the way a child's shoulders should never tense. "Are those the men you're hiding from?" I murmured. She nodded once. And I, a woman hired to maintain order, not disrupt it, made a choice I couldn't undo. I closed the mythology book and placed my hand gently on her shoulder, leaning close enough that the guards could hear when one of them barked, "Where is the girl?" I looked them straight in the eye. "She's with me." It was the first decision that would change everything. And it was the moment that set the stage for the question her father, Don Vittorio Gallo, would soon demand an answer to. "Who's watching my daughter?" My answer would be the truth. "I am." She asked me to. And this is where the story begins. Before continuing the story, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to you. For the rest of that afternoon, Sophia stayed close. Not clingy, not chatty, just near, like proximity was its own kind of permission. We didn't speak about what I'd said to the guards. We didn't speak at all, really. I kept reading from the mythology book in a quiet voice, and she kept listening, the tension slowly draining from her narrow shoulders. When the head of security finally returned to collect her, she stood and said, "Thank you," in a whisper that felt older than she was. The next day, she greeted me with a question I wasn't prepared for. "Did your mother read to you when you were little?" It was barely past 9 a.m., and she was already curled into the library chair with the same mythology book resting on her knees. I paused mid-step, a stack of phonics worksheets in hand, and tried to decide whether to answer or redirect. Before I could say anything, she added, "Mine didn't. She died when I was 3. I don't remember her voice. That morning, we didn't touch the worksheets. Instead, I told her about mine, how my mother used to make up stories when we couldn't afford new books. How she'd speak in voices and act out scenes, even when she was exhausted from work." Sophia didn't ask questions while I spoke. She just listened, nodding, her thumb brushing absently over the corner of the book in her lap. At the end of the hour, she said, "Do you think Athena missed her mother, even though she came from Zeus' head?" That became our rhythm. We still did our lessons. I wasn't reckless, but I began folding stories into the gaps between grammar and pronunciation. I read aloud while she colored, answered whispered questions that had nothing to do with school, and occasionally stayed longer than I should have. The kitchen staff started leaving out extra cookies during our sessions. The housekeeper, Maria, began smiling when she passed the library door and saw Sofia giggling at something I'd said. I didn't mean to stay past the scheduled hours. I just never wanted to be the first to say goodbye. One rainy afternoon, she asked what it was like to ride a subway. "You mean alone?" I asked. She nodded, swinging her legs beneath the oversized armchair. "With people you don't know all around you. Just existing." I told her about the noise and the music, the way the brakes screeched when the car slowed, the rush of wind before the doors opened. She listened like I was describing another planet. "Do you ever feel scared when you're walking alone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Sometimes. But you still do it." "I still do it." She looked down at her lap. "I don't think I've ever been alone. Not really." That night, I stayed for tea. Not at Sofia's request, at Maria's. "She eats better when you stay," the older woman said, sliding a cup toward me on a silver tray. I should have said no. But my shoes were already off, my lesson bag half-zipped, and Sofia had just brought over a second chair so I could sit beside her on the rug. We read about Persephone and the underworld until she dozed off against my shoulder. When Vittorio Gallo finally made an appearance, it was after dusk. He moved through the hallway like shadow, no sound, no warning. I didn't see him until I stood to leave and found him in the doorway, watching. He didn't speak, just nodded once, eyes unreadable. Then he walked away, and I couldn't tell if I'd passed some test or failed it entirely. Sofia never mentioned her father unless I asked, and even then, her answers were small. "He works a lot. He sleeps downstairs. He doesn't like when people raise their voices." Once, she told me he carried the smell of cigar smoke even when he wasn't smoking. Another time, she said, "He loves me. But he doesn't know what to do with me." I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't have to. As the weeks passed, my routine changed without me noticing. I arrived early. I stayed late. My other tutoring clients began shifting around my Gallo hours like they were immovable. I didn't tell them why. I barely admitted it to myself. One day, while organizing flashcards, I found a folded piece of paper inside my lesson binder. It was a drawing, childlike, but careful. A house with 3 people in it, a tall man in a dark suit, a little girl with curly hair, and a woman with glasses and a ponytail. Me. Above the 3 figures, in careful block letters, Sofia had written, "Family Tree, Unofficial." I sat there for a long moment, my throat tight, the lesson forgotten. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a declaration. A want. And a warning. That night, when I got home, I took the drawing out again and smoothed the creases. I should have felt honored. Maybe I did. But mostly, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something too deep to step into casually. I reminded myself I was her tutor. Nothing more. Nothing less. But Sofia had drawn a different conclusion. And when a child like her chooses someone, it's not a whim. It's a survival instinct. It started with a simple question, slipped into a pause between stories. "Miss Dalila," Sofia asked, tracing the edge of a page with her finger, "have you ever seen a real statue of Athena?" I nodded, unsure where she was going with it. She looked up, hopeful. "Do you think, maybe one day, we could see her too?" "Not in a book. In real life." At first, I brushed it off as curiosity. But the question stayed with me, long after the lesson ended, long after I left the estate. I could still see the way she'd looked at that illustration, not as a child looking at art, but as someone longing to step into another world. The Gallo library was vast, yes, but books weren't enough anymore. She didn't just want knowledge. She wanted wonder. That night, I sat at my laptop drafting an email I almost didn't send. It was to a contact at the Metropolitan Museum, someone I'd worked with once during a tutoring program for gifted students. I asked for a private viewing slot early morning, off the books, quiet. A long shot, especially with my vague explanation. I signed it anyway and hit send, telling myself it probably wouldn't happen. It did. The museum offered a private 8 a.m. appointment before opening hours, a single guest and 2 adults, no press, no attention. The next hurdle was asking Vittorio. I wrote a full itinerary, highlighted all security checkpoints, mentioned exit maps and escort details. Maria handed it to him while I waited in the hall, nerves twisting my stomach. I half expected him to reject it instantly. Instead, he read it in silence, then passed it back with only 2 words, "If she wants." Maria raised an eyebrow at me as I collected the page, my heart thudding. I thanked her, thanked him through her, and left before he could change his mind. It wasn't a victory. It was permission with strings attached. 2 mornings later, we were in a sleek black SUV heading toward the Met. Marco was driving. A second guard followed in a separate car. Sofia wore a soft gray coat and ballet flats, her curls tucked into a beret that made her look older than 7. She was silent the entire ride until the museum came into view. Then she pressed her hands to the window and whispered, "It's bigger than I thought." The museum was empty when we arrived, echoing and grand in the soft morning light. A curator met us at the side entrance and led us through quiet halls, the footsteps of the guards clicking behind us. Sofia barely spoke, her eyes drinking in every display, every statue. When we reached the Greek and Roman exhibit, she stopped in front of a towering marble Athena, her breath catching. "She's real," she said softly. "She's really real." I stood beside her and watched her face, not the sculpture. She looked exactly how a child should look in awe. No guards, no shadows, no rules in that moment. Just light and wonder. A quiet pocket of normal. We didn't know that while Sofia traced the lines of a bronze shield, something had gone wrong. The tech team monitoring the perimeter lost signal on the backup location channel. Just a 5-minute outage, nothing catastrophic. But those 5 minutes were enough. A rival syndicate, known for watching Gallo movements, flagged the SUV plates from a traffic cam. They didn't act, but they knew. And for men like Vittorio, knowledge is as dangerous as a loaded gun. I noticed the shift first in Marco's posture. He placed a call without speaking a word, eyes sweeping the hall. Seconds later, a second guard entered from the side, nodded once, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Marco stepped between us and the curator. "We need to leave. Now." Sofia looked up confused. "But we haven't seen the amphory," she protested. I touched her shoulder, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "We'll come back another time, okay?" This was just the beginning. She nodded, but I saw the disappointment bloom anyway. Outside, the sun had risen fully. A third SUV was waiting. Marco opened the door for us with more force than usual. I held Sofia's hand as we climbed in, my own fingers trembling slightly. Whatever this was, it wasn't a false alarm. The estate gates closed behind us less than 10 minutes later. I expected to be debriefed. Instead, 2 unfamiliar guards escorted me not to the library, but to the East Wing. They didn't say a word. And I didn't ask. The room they led me to was all dark wood and sharp angles, more study than interrogation space, but the message was clear. Vittorio was already inside, standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, still as death. I waited in the center of the room, hands folded. The guards exited without instruction. He didn't turn to face me. Not yet. Not until he said it. "Who's watching my daughter?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was nothing calm in it. It coiled around the words like a warning. I took a breath before answering. "I am," I said. "She asked me to." He turned then. Slowly. Those eyes cold, unreadable, calculating. I could feel the weight of them pinning me in place. "She asked," he repeated. "And so you decided to expose her?" No, my voice didn't shake, though it should have. "I decided to give her one morning of wonder. I decided to trust the plan your team approved. The glitch wasn't ours." And the moment it happened, I followed Marco's lead. His jaw tightened. "She is not yours to protect." "She's not yours to cage," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was immediate and brutal. He stepped closer, each movement precise. "I let you in," he said. "Into my house. Near my child. Because she wanted you. But one is not reason enough to risk war. And yet here I am. Standing here. Not running. Not lying. I met his gaze and added, if you want me gone, say it. But don't mistake protection for betrayal. I would never risk her. Not for anything. He was silent again. Then he looked away. Go, he said. Wait in the library. I need time. I left without another word, my pulse still hammering in my throat. Back in the library, Sofia was curled in her usual chair, sketching something in her notebook. When she saw me, she smiled bright, unburdened. The only smile in the room. Did you like the statues? I asked. She nodded, showing me her drawing, a clumsy but loving sketch of Athena with a crown and a sword. She reminded me of you, Sofia said. I didn't speak. I just pulled her close. And held on. What would you have done in Dalila's place, followed protocol, or given Sofia a moment of freedom? Leave your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The library felt different after the museum. Quieter somehow. Not in sound, but in spirit. The chairs were still there, the same old smell of polished wood and old paper hung in the air, but the energy had shifted. Sofia sat at the table, hands folded, a workbook open in front of her, but her eyes didn't move. They stayed fixed on the far wall, where a new security camera now blinked softly red. There were 2 more guards assigned to her rotation now. They didn't speak, didn't interfere, but they didn't leave either. One always stood within arm's reach, the other outside the door, a quiet silhouette through the frosted glass. It didn't matter that nothing had happened at the museum. The fact that it could have was enough to change everything. Sofia barely looked up when I entered. She gave me a small nod, polite and empty. No bright, good morning, no questions about Athena or Olympus. Just a child doing what she was told, under the eyes of men who didn't know how to soften. And I understood, then, that this was punishment not for her, but for me. I tried, at first, to pull her back the way I always had. I brought new vocabulary flashcards with gods she hadn't seen yet. I folded riddles into reading exercises, asked her if she wanted to play word games like we used to. But she only shook her head gently, lips pressed into a line. I think I'm just supposed to do the normal work now, she murmured. The days bled together. Lessons passed like clockwork, perfectly executed and perfectly cold. I stayed exactly on schedule. I smiled at the guards. I said thank you when I was escorted in and out. And every night, I went home and stared at the same unmarked drawing she'd once folded into my binder, our unofficial family tree. It wasn't until Thursday that she cracked. We were reviewing noun genders when I asked her if she remembered which myth ended in golden apples. She blinked slowly, then looked toward the guard in the corner, like she was waiting for permission to speak beyond the lesson. Then she closed the book. Papa says they're for protection, she said softly. But I feel like a prisoner. I didn't respond right away. Not with words, anyway. I reached out and slid her book aside, leaning forward so the guard couldn't read my lips. You're not wrong, I whispered. She didn't smile. But her eyes flickered, just for a second. After the lesson, I found Maria in the hallway, her face lined with worry. She won't eat much, she said. Only what's on the exact schedule. And she doesn't talk to the guards anymore. Not even Marco. I asked if Vittorio knew. Maria nodded. He knows. He thinks she's safe. That's all that matters to him right now. That evening, I requested a meeting with him, not as an employee, but as a teacher speaking on behalf of a student. I was led to the West Wing this time, not the study. The room was smaller, lined with quiet bookshelves and a single chair where he sat, reading something with a leather spine. He didn't look up when I entered. But he didn't dismiss me either. She's afraid of your silence more than your rules, I said. He turned a page. She's alive. That's the priority. She's fading, I replied. That's not the same as being safe. He finally looked up, eyes flat. I didn't ask for your opinion, Miss Lucciano. No, I said. But your daughter did. Something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of something behind the frost. Not warmth. Not approval. But not dismissal either. He closed the book slowly and set it aside. I don't expect you to understand my world, he said. But I do expect you to survive in it if you choose to stay. I met his stare. And what about her? Does she get to choose anything? He didn't answer. I left without another word. The next day, I came in with a book hidden inside a math binder. It was The Lightning Thief, dog-eared from years of classroom use. Nothing too dangerous. Just clever. Magical. A boy who didn't belong, who found strength in the myths other people told him not to believe in. It wasn't on the schedule. Sofia blinked when she opened the binder and saw it. She looked up at me, and something in her expression cracked disbelief, then fear, then the tiniest flicker of hope. I only said 10 minutes. That's all. She opened to the first chapter. And for the first time in days, her voice held curiosity again. We read together in the quietest whisper, our heads close, the words flowing between us like a secret spell. The guard didn't move. The camera blinked on. And Sofia smiled. Just once. But it was real. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, a steady, rhythmic tapping against the tall windows of the Gallo estate. Storms didn't usually interrupt our lessons, but this one had swallowed the house in thunder and flickering lights. Sofia sat curled in her usual chair, her feet tucked beneath her, hair still damp from the quick dash indoors. She'd asked if we could keep the lights low, like candlelight, she said, and I agreed, just to see her eyes light up again. It felt quiet. Safe, even. But the kind of quiet that comes before a crack. I remember thinking I should have left sooner. The lesson had run over. Maria had offered me tea. Sofia asked for just one more chapter. The library was warm, and the rain made everything feel suspended. I said yes when I should have said goodnight. We were midway through a story, a boy facing a dragon with nothing but cleverness and a wooden shield, when the house shuddered. It wasn't thunder. It was sharper. Closer. Something that vibrated through the floor, like the earth itself had winced. Sofia froze mid-breath. The book slid from her lap. Then came the second sound. Gunfire. Not far, not distant, but inside the perimeter. I moved fast, grabbing Sofia's hand, pulling her behind the nearest bookshelf. She didn't scream. She didn't ask questions. She just followed, like she'd rehearsed this before. Outside the library walls, I heard shouting, voices I didn't recognize, boots thudding down the hall, a crash that could have been a vase or something worse. Sofia clutched my arm, her breathing shallow but silent. There were no guards inside the library this time. They'd rotated, maybe stepped away. I reached under the rug, my fingers scrambling for the brass latch I'd seen once, weeks ago, when Maria had shown me the estate's old architecture. It opened with a click I will never forget. The corridor was narrow and dark, a maintenance passage carved between walls for reasons that belonged to another era. I pulled Sofia in first, then lowered the latch behind us. The silence inside was thick. The walls muffled the chaos outside, but not completely. We could still hear everything. Every shot. Every scream. Sofia clung to me, her face pressed into my side, her small hands shaking. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her down with me onto the cold floor. I didn't know how long we'd need to stay. Didn't know who was in the house. Didn't know if we'd be found first by help or by something worse. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," I whispered back. She looked up at me, eyes wide in the dark. "Is this because of the museum?" "No," I lied. "This is just bad timing." Then I began to tell her a story. I didn't have a book. I didn't need one. I recited the myths from memory, Athena, Persephone, Hercules, stories she already knew, but made new by the darkness. Her breathing slowed. The shaking softened. She leaned into my side like I was the anchor in a storm. And I kept talking, not to entertain her, but to keep us both from falling apart. I don't know how much time passed. Eventually, the sounds outside changed, the shouting faded, replaced by rushed footsteps and the low murmur of commands. Sofia had dozed against me, her fingers still curled into the fabric of my coat. I held her there, still and quiet, waiting for a sign. It came as a voice, low, sharp, familiar, barking orders in Italian. "Vittorio." I opened the panel just enough to peer out. Marco was there, guns still drawn, flanked by 3 others. Vittorio stood in the center of the library, soaked from the rain, eyes blazing as he scanned the room. He looked like he hadn't taken a breath since the first shot. I stepped out slowly. "She's safe," I said. His head snapped toward me, and he moved fast, faster than I thought someone like him could move, until he was in front of me. I stepped aside so he could see her, Sofia, still curled in the narrow corridor, blinking awake. "Papa," she mumbled, her voice hoarse. He dropped to his knees, scooping her into his arms with a desperation that shattered the mask he always wore. She clung to him like she'd been waiting her whole life to do it. He held her there, crouched in the library like nothing else existed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't before. Terror. Not for himself. For her. His voice was barely a whisper. "Who's watching my daughter?" I didn't hesitate. "I am," I said. "I always will. Even when you can't." And this time, he didn't argue. "Would you have kept reading to calm Sofia, or tried to escape, even if it meant risking being seen?" Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for the story, where the lines between protector and partner begin to blur. After the night of the attack, things didn't go back to normal. Not really. The guards were more present than ever, patrols doubled, exit logs digitized and enforced. But inside the walls of the estate, something else had shifted, something quieter than protocol. Vittorio Gallo no longer looked through me when we crossed paths. The morning after, he asked if I wanted breakfast. Not with Sofia, with him. It was an offer, not an order, and I was too exhausted to pretend I wasn't surprised. I followed him to the smaller dining room, where the windows overlooked the gardens still slick with rain. He poured the coffee himself. We didn't speak much. Not at first. He asked how Sofia had responded in hiding. I told him she'd listened, stayed calm, trusted me. He nodded once and said, "She doesn't trust easily." The next day, he invited me to stay through dinner. Sofia insisted, practically dragged me to the kitchen to show me how Maria made pasta from scratch. I rolled dough beside her while Maria watched with something that looked suspiciously like hope in her eyes. "You should stay more often," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "She sleeps better when you're here." I didn't know how to respond to that. It kept happening. One day turned into two. Lessons turned into afternoons, and afternoons turned into evenings where I stayed through dessert. Sofia started reading aloud to me, curled under a blanket, her voice stronger, steadier. She still glanced at the shadows where guards stood, but less often. Vittorio remained distant, but not closed. He began sitting with us sometimes after dinner, sipping espresso while Sofia chattered about myths and book characters. One evening, after she went to bed, he lingered. I thought he might excuse himself like usual, but he stayed by the fire, eyes flicking over the flames like they were telling him something he didn't want to hear. "She used to be afraid of the dark," he said quietly. I didn't ask who she was, Sofia or someone else. He went on. "I bought her $1,000 nightlight system. She still cried when I turned off the lamp." I looked at him, really looked, not at the power, not the reputation, but the man. He looked tired. Not in the physical sense. In the kind that settles behind your ribs. "I was raised in Palermo," he said. "The kind of place where boys don't cry, and girls grow up knowing exactly who not to look in the eye." His fingers tapped rhythmically against the coffee mug, slow and precise. "My father beat loyalty into us. My mother, she disappeared before I turned 10. He told me she ran off. I believed him for years. I didn't interrupt. I found out later she died in that same house," he continued, voice lower. "Collapsed in the hallway and no one called for help. Not fast enough anyway." He glanced at me then and, for once, didn't look away. I swore I'd never be that kind of parent. I nodded. "You're not." "I keep her locked in a cage," he replied. "Different material. Same design." I didn't argue. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was speaking into a space that hadn't existed before. One he was trying to trust. And I was cautious enough to let him build it without rushing to fill it. I began noticing other things. Books that had sat untouched now had bookmarks inside. Sofia's schedule shifted to include an unsupervised hour in the garden, just one, but it was something. And Vittorio started walking her to the library himself, even staying for a few minutes to listen to her read. Maria winked at me one morning and said, "He's remembering how to be a father." "You did that." "It wasn't intentional." I hadn't planned any of this. I was still just her tutor. Technically. But somehow, I'd become part of the air in that house. Not quite family, but not just a guest. And I knew it couldn't last. One evening, after Sofia had fallen asleep beside me on the couch mid-book, I stood and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. Vittorio watched from the doorway, silent as ever. I should go, I said. He nodded, expression unreadable. I hesitated. I think I should step back from all of this. He didn't argue. Didn't ask why. Just said, if that's what you need. His tone was neutral, but I caught it, the faint tightening around his eyes. The kind of withdrawal that looks like permission but feels like loss. The next day, I didn't come. Or the next. Maria left me a voicemail I didn't return. I told myself this was healthy. I told myself I was protecting boundaries. I told myself the girl would be fine without me. But on the third day, she stopped speaking. Refused breakfast. Didn't respond to tutors. She wouldn't leave her room, wouldn't open her notebook, wouldn't even read. When Maria finally called again, her voice was thinner. She keeps asking for you. She doesn't cry. She just waits. I returned that evening. Vittorio met me at the front entrance this time, no guards between us. She hasn't smiled in 3 days, he said. I didn't speak. I just walked past him, toward the only girl who had ever asked me to stay and meant it with her whole heart. I thought silence would help. That distance would create clarity, or boundaries, or some version of emotional safety I could point to and say, I did the right thing. But 2 weeks passed, and all it did was hollow me out. I stopped reaching for my phone. I stopped checking the time in the evenings, telling myself I wasn't wondering what page they were on without me. The nights were the worst. I'd catch myself setting the table for one more than necessary. Or reading something I knew she would have loved, then folding the corner like I'd bring it to her later. But later never came. And I couldn't tell if I missed her more than she missed me, or if I was just a coward for not finding out. The calls came. Maria left soft, pleading messages at first, then only her name and a time. I deleted each one before listening all the way through. I told myself Sofia would be fine. She had staff, tutors, security, a father. But she didn't ask for them. Not once. When Maria showed up at my door on the 14th night, it was raining. She wore no coat, only an umbrella and that familiar worry stamped across her face. She hasn't eaten properly in days, she said. She doesn't speak unless spoken to. She cries, but only when no one's looking. I stepped aside before she could finish. Maria placed a folded note in my hand. It was written in a child's careful block letters, the kind that takes twice as long to form. It said, ask her to come back. No name, no plea, no guilt. Just the weight of it. Just the ache in 7 words. And suddenly, nothing else mattered. I returned before dawn, unsure if the gates would even open. They did. No guards stopped me. No questions were asked. Marco appeared from the shadows like he'd been expecting it all along. He gave a nod, not a word, and led me through the still sleeping house. The library was dark, unlit since I left. Books untouched. Cushions stiff. It looked like a scene preserved in amber, waiting for life to return. I didn't go there first. I went upstairs to her. I found her curled beneath the covers in a pale blue nightgown, eyes wide open but unfocused. She didn't startle when I entered. She didn't speak, but when I sat on the edge of her bed, she reached for my hand without a word. And then, finally, she smiled. It was faint, shy, trembling, but it was there. She pressed her cheek into my palm and whispered, "You came." My throat closed up. I didn't say I never should have left. She already knew. Later, Vittorio found me in the hallway outside her room. He looked like he hadn't slept. Like he hadn't breathed deeply in days. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the space between us charged with too many unspoken things. Then he said, low and even, "You shouldn't be here." I met his eyes. Then fire me. But I'm not leaving her. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. No threats. No orders. No arguments. Only silence. And then, almost reluctantly, he stepped aside. The quiet way a man does when he realizes he's lost a battle He didn't have the heart to win. That evening, Maria cooked enough for 3. Sofia sat between us at the table, still quiet but steady now. She ate slowly, one bite at a time, like remembering how food was supposed to work. I told her a myth about a girl who went to the underworld and came back stronger. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away once. When the plates were cleared, and she was tucked safely into bed with her night light glowing beside her, Vittorio poured a glass of wine and handed it to me without comment. We sat in the same chairs we had once filled with silence, but it was different now. Not a wall, but a window. I took a sip and looked at him. "I didn't come back for you," I said. "I know." His voice was quiet. "But you came back." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because in the end, it wasn't about jobs or boundaries or regrets. It was about a little girl who chose me. And I had chosen her right back. It started with a crayon drawing. Sofia brought it into the library one afternoon, folded like a secret. She waited until the guard stepped out, then slid it onto my lap. 6 stick figures stood in front of a table with candles and balloons, each with a lopsided smile. "Can I have one?" she asked. "A birthday party. Like a real one." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the drawing, then at her. She looked hesitant. Not afraid, exactly. Just careful, the way someone asks for something they've never been allowed to want. And I understood it wasn't really about cake or gifts. It was about noise. About normal. About children laughing without earpieces nearby. "Does your papa know you're asking?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "He won't say yes. But I thought maybe you could ask anyway." And just like that, she'd handed me another impossible thing. And expected me to make it real. Later that evening, I brought it up with Vittorio. He was in the conservatory, staring out at the trimmed hedges like they were a puzzle he couldn't solve. I handed him the drawing. He looked at it, long and hard. Then he said, "No, too dangerous. Too unpredictable. Too many unknowns." He didn't raise his voice, but his finality was like a slammed door. "She's turning 8, I said quietly. "She's alive," he replied. "That's the gift. She wants laughter, not lockdown." His shoulders tensed, like I'd struck something sore. "You've given her guards," I said. "Give her one day of joy. One day to feel like other children." "She isn't other children," he snapped. "No," I agreed. "She's yours. Which means she'll never ask again if you say no now." He didn't say anything else. He left the conservatory. But he took the drawing with him. The next morning, Marco found me in the kitchen and said, he'll allow it. Under very strict terms. And just like that, the party began to take shape. We kept it small, 6 girls from Sofia's remote learning circle, each parent vetted by Gallo security. No outside vendors. No entertainers. Everything food, music, decorations would come from inside the estate. Maria baked the cake. I made party bags with Sofia late into the night, her excitement radiating like sunlight. She asked me every day, "Are you sure they'll come?" And every day I said yes. On the morning of her birthday, Sofia wore a yellow dress with white daisies embroidered along the sleeves. Her curls were pinned back with little clips shaped like stars. She looked in the mirror and said, "Do I look like someone who gets a party?" I said, "You look like someone who deserves one." And she smiled so big it almost hurt to look at her. The guests arrived one by one, small, unsure, clutching wrapped gifts like tickets to a foreign country. Sofia greeted them herself at the front door, holding my hand tight until each girl smiled back. Within 20 minutes, the music started. And then the laughter. Real laughter, sharp, bright, uncontrolled. Vittorio didn't attend. Not officially. But I saw him in the upstairs balcony, hands clasped behind his back, watching. He stayed there for over an hour, unmoving, like stepping into that moment might make it vanish. He watched her dance, laugh, sing. She ran through the courtyard with the others, her cheeks flushed pink. At one point, she pulled me into the center and made me twirl with her. I did. And when she looked up at the window, she waved to him. He didn't wave back, but he didn't turn away either. After the last child left, after the wrapping paper had been gathered and the candles blown out, I found Vittorio in the garden. He was smoking, something he rarely did anymore. I didn't speak at first. Just waited. And then, without turning, he said, "You gave her this." He exhaled, smoke curling like fog between us. "And you gave me," he paused, as if searching for the right shape of the thought. This silence in my heart I didn't know I wanted. He looked at me then, really looked. And I understood that, for him, peace wasn't soft. It was terrifying. We didn't speak again that night, but when he passed me in the hall the next morning, he nodded, not as a boss or a man protecting something he owned, but as a father, acknowledging the woman who had brought joy into his daughter's world. And, without meaning to, into his. If you had grown up with fear instead of freedom, what would a single day of joy mean to you? Drop your answer in the comments and make sure to subscribe for the story, where feelings begin to surface in the quietest of ways. The first time Vittorio opened a bottle of wine in the library, it was past midnight. The house was quiet, Sofia long asleep, and the storm outside had settled into a steady hush against the windows. He poured 2 glasses without asking and set one beside me, the gesture as casual as it was deliberate. There was no pretense. No small talk. Just silence and the unspoken understanding that something had shifted between us. "I never thought this room would hold laughter again," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. His voice was low, almost conversational, but not quite comfortable. "I built it to keep people impressed. Not safe." I glanced around the walls lined with books and memory. "And now?" I asked softly. "Now I find myself avoiding it when you're not in it." It wasn't flirtation. It was admission. The kind that carries more weight than charm ever could. I didn't answer. Just sipped slowly and let the silence answer for me. The fire crackled like punctuation between thoughts we weren't yet brave enough to say. He asked about my childhood that night, not the facts, but the feelings. What I remembered. Who I missed. I told him about summer nights with the windows open, the scent of fresh bread from the apartment below, and my mother humming off-key to old records. She never owned anything expensive, I said. But she made everything feel like gold. He didn't speak for a while after that. When our hands brushed on the couch, neither of us pulled away. The air changed, softened, deepened. We looked at each other, and for one suspended moment, the space between us felt like a thread pulling taut. Then Sofia's voice called from down the hall. And whatever almost happened, didn't. The next morning, Sofia sat beside me at breakfast, swinging her legs beneath the chair. She was humming under her breath, distracted by something, then suddenly looked up. "You're my person," she said. I blinked. "What?" She smiled. "You're not just my teacher. You're my person." The words stuck with me all day. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I did. In a house full of people paid to protect her, Sofia had chosen me to belong to. Not out of duty, out of connection. And that meant everything. Later, Vittorio asked me to stay after Sofia's tutoring session. He stood in the doorway, unusually hesitant. "She needs consistency," he said. "But that's not why I'm asking." His voice dropped slightly. "I want to know if you'd stay. Not just for her. For this." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I felt the weight of it. This was more than employment. More than temporary. He wasn't asking for a tutor. He was asking for permanence. "I didn't come here to belong," I said. He looked at me, unreadable. "But I think I do." It wasn't a declaration. It was a realization. And he nodded, like he'd known all along. That evening, Sofia asked if I had a mother. We were lying on the rug in the sitting room, her head in my lap, a book splayed open between us. I smoothed her curls and said yes. But I lost her a long time ago. She didn't ask how or why. Just whispered, "Do you miss her?" "Every day," I said. "But sometimes, the people we find later in life, they become parts of us, too." She nodded, thoughtful, then said, "Maybe I can be part of you. Like you're part of me." I kissed the top of her head, unable to speak. Because she already was. The last image that night was of the 3 of us on the couch. Sofia in the middle, curled beneath a shared blanket, a storybook in her lap. Vittorio sat on one side, still in his dress shirt, but with his shoes off, for once. I was on the other, one arm around Sofia, the other cradling a book as she read aloud. It didn't look like perfection. but it looked like family. A family forming in quiet defiance of everything around them. The house felt different now, softened by the years rather than weighed down by them. The guards were still present, but fewer, standing farther away, more like watchful silhouettes than constant shadows. Vittorio had stepped back from the day-to-day power that once consumed him, choosing instead to linger in hallways and gardens, present in ways he'd never allowed himself before. As for me, I still taught, though I didn't need to. It grounded me, tethered me to the version of myself that first walked into this estate, afraid of everything except telling a child a story she needed to hear. Sofia was 15 now, taller, sharper, and carrying her confidence like a torch she had crafted herself. Her curls were longer, her voice stronger, and her questions even bolder than the first day she asked about Athena. She headed the mythology club at her private school, something she'd formed because books shouldn't stay silent when they can sing. And she was right, they never did stay silent for her. They grew with her. One quiet autumn afternoon, I sat in the library, our library, grading essays when I heard her keys at the front door. She rarely brought friends home. The old habits of caution still lingered around her like petals pressed into a book. But today her voice was bright, echoing against the marble entryway. "Dalila, I brought someone," she called. There was no fear in her tone, only excitement. A moment later, she entered the library with a girl about her age in tow, dark-haired, shy, her backpack hugged to her chest. "This is Mila," Sofia said, beaming. "She's new at school. I told her we do storytime sometimes." Mila blushed, glancing at the shelves towering above her. "Can we stay for storytime?" Sofia asked, her voice playful but also warm, like she already knew the answer. I smiled before I could stop myself. "Of course," I said, even though I had a stack of ungraded essays still waiting for my attention. Sofia dropped onto the couch, patting the cushion beside her for Mila to sit, and then tucked her legs beneath herself just like she used to at 7. A familiar ache stirred in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize time is moving, but love has stayed exactly where it belongs. I chose a book from the shelf, one she had loved since childhood. She recognized it immediately and whispered, "Full circle." Halfway through the chapter, I sensed a presence at the doorway. Vittorio leaned against the frame, arms folded, watching the three of us with soft eyes he would have denied having years ago. His edges had worn down, not smoothed entirely, but reshaped by fatherhood, by trust, by the quiet life he'd fought to protect. He no longer commanded the room, he simply belonged to it. And for him, that was enough. After I finished reading, Mila hesitated before setting the book aside. She looked at Sofia, then at me, her brow furrowed with hesitant curiosity. "Is she your mom?" she asked softly, as if afraid of crossing a line she couldn't see. Sofia didn't hesitate. "She's the one who watched me," she said, when no one else did. The room went still. Not silent, just still, in that rare and sacred way where words stop needing explanations. Sofia's answer wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't embellished. It wasn't softened to make anyone comfortable. It was simply true. And the truth settled into my bones like warmth. Mila nodded slowly, absorbing it with the solemnity only a 15-year-old can muster. "Then you're lucky," she said. Sofia smiled at her friend, then at me, and I felt something inside me loosen, something that had held on tight for years. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Just an old ache finally releasing. After Mila left, Sofia lingered in the library doorway. "You know," she said, glancing at the shelves, "this place feels different when you're in it." "It's always been yours," I told her. She shook her head gently. "No. It became mine because you stayed." And then, for just a moment, she hugged me the way she used to when she was small. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed and the house settled into its familiar nighttime hush, I found myself standing in the same spot where I had once said goodbye. The same spot I'd walked away from, and the same spot I'd returned to because a child had asked me to. Vittorio joined me, not speaking, just standing close enough that our shoulders touched. "You did more than teach her," he said quietly. "You became home." I looked toward the staircase where she'd disappeared moments earlier, her laughter still ghosting the air. Home wasn't a place. It was a choice. over and over again. A decision to stay when everything told you to run. And I had stayed. I said yes to a child once, I whispered, more to myself than to him. And that yes gave me everything. Thank you for listening until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. There's another story like the one you just enjoyed on your left screen.